It's June 28th, Ukraine Media Center Current Forum starts its operation. My name is Svetlana Shaparenko. I want to greet everybody with Day of Constitution. First of all, I want to thank the security and defense forces of Ukraine who fight for our rights and freedoms in the battlefield, something that is contemplated by the Constitution and something that we didn't think we should be fighting for in a way like this with our blood, with our strength, but that is obviously something that makes us stronger, and we come to the victory gradually but every day closer and closer. And it's quite symbolic that on this day, when we recall about our rights and freedoms, we will have to discuss the way that Russia tries to deprive us about these rights and freedoms. Now we will be discussing the report on people abducted by Russia in the occupied territories. I'm presenting our speakers today. It's Natalia Okhotnikova, Human Rights Advisor at ZMINA. Maryia Kvitsinskaya is about to join us online. She's expert on Europe and Central Asia at the World Organization Against Torture. Oleksandr Kononenko, the Human Rights Ombudsman in bodies of security and defense forces, and also the members of the families of the abductees. Hanna, a friend of a kidnapped volunteer Marharyta Kharenko; Oleksandra, the mother of a kidnapped Iryna Navalna; and Anhelina, a relative of the kidnapped volunteer Yaroslav Zhuk. So Natalia, tell us please about this report. What are the key figures about what are the key figures regarding the people abducted by Russians? What are the regions where such abductions are taking place most frequently? Thank you very much for this opportunity to present this report. Within the last half a year, ZMINA Center for Human Rights was preparing this report. We focused on the abductions of the activists, of the Ukrainian activists, so we were able to make it in coordination with the Freedom House, and I want to thank also Maryia Kvitsinskaya for her expert support. As to the number, it's difficult to say the exact number. The representatives of the government, they have their indicators. We were trying to focus on the correct documentation of the figures of the cases from different sources, the cases of abductions by Russian military, the representatives of occupational powers, of Ukrainian activists. We were able to document 562 cases of violent abductions of Ukrainian activists. We had 52 one-hour interviews with the members of the families of the abductees and those who were freed from the places of confinement, and with the witnesses who were witnessing the way those people were abducted. And we had also 100 cases of the analysis from the open sources with the verification and triangulation of those details. As to the conclusions, as to the groups of the active citizens who were abducted, we segregated the following groups. The biggest category of the abductees are the activists of different types. They are volunteers who were supporting the civilians, who were helping from the very first hours of the full-scale invasion, in evacuation of the people, distribution of food rations, well, supporting people in different ways. And Russians were aimed at cutting those ties, cutting those connections, to cut that help and create the illusion that Ukraine and the volunteer community did not help. So we documented 223 cases like that. Another big group are the representatives who, the people who were either working or were the deputies of the local authorities, the representatives of local governments, 128 persons that we were able to document. Those people, they were representing by themselves and by fulfilling their duties. They were part of Ukrainian government, and the Russians exercised their criminal influence so that the local governments could not operate, to suspend their operations, to intimidate those people and all the population in that area. Another category we've segregated are the journalists, the representatives of different mass media, local Ukrainian mass media, who were covering the events, and their task was to stay until the very last moment and to convey the information about what was going on. And one of the latest cases documented from the open sources, it happened to a journalist and her husband. They were abducted, and their whereabouts in the Zaporizhia region are still unknown. Well, also we documented a number of religious actors being abducted. All of those 8 cases, they were the cases of abduction of the representatives of Protestants, Orthodox, Christian Orthodox Church, and other confessions that were helping their adherents physically. They were involved in humanitarian support and in emotional support, and the Russians exercised different illegal actions in their regard, but fortunately they were all brought back. Yet another category we mention are the cultural actors, the heads, the representatives of the museums, houses of culture, because Ukrainian culture is one of the pillars the Ukrainian nation stands on, and Russians were considering such abductions or pillaging of the funds as a way to close those cultural places. And yet another categories are the representatives of education sector. We paid specific attention to the fact that they were directors of the schools. For example, in Kherson region, we've documented that the occupiers, specifically after the successful counteroffensive of Ukrainian forces, continue to present the directors of the schools in the east bank of Dnipro, so they open their schools and teach according to the Russian curriculum. Summarizing, unfortunately, the leader is, by the number of abductions, is Kherson region. It's followed by Zaporizhia region, which became victims within the first hours after the beginning of the full-scale invasion. There is a number of documented abductions in Luhansk region as well, but the number is not as big, but it's not because Russians do not abduct less people in Luhansk region, but because people end up under occupation, and we cannot document all of the cases of abductions as the people are intimidated and are afraid to convey any information about such abductions. As to the gender distribution, 1 in 5 abductees are women, so it's mostly men who are abducted, aged from 18 to 65, so 1 in 5 cases is a woman, is a female. So to summarize it, the key moments we would like to draw your attention to, we think that it's a systemic policy. It's not something it's not an abuse of power by the executioner. So that fact was confirmed by the witnesses from different regions. The Russians who were coming to the representatives of the local governments, they were coming with the lists of persons who were of their interests. So those lists had to be compiled somehow, and they were persecuting the active citizens according to those lists. Secondly, as I mentioned, Russians were trying to ruin the structure of the local communities and to impose their structure, their organization, to replace the representatives of Ukrainian local governments with their representatives. There were cases in Kyiv region, for example, the head of Motyzhin community were, along with the members of their family, were found dead after liberation of the region. Yet another thing we wanted to draw everyone's attention to: the Russians used the civilians contrary to any standards of the criminal law, international humanitarian law. They used the civilians to replenish their exchange fund, and they don't even conceal it. They tell it as they're being detained. They pick our civilians and they keep them at different places of detention. And the last summary is that the violent abductions are accompanied by physical impact, and psychological influence. The people are being tortured, beaten, along with the members of their families. So I would like to give the floor to the members of the families who would tell about their experience related to the abduction of their close ones. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, those figures in this report, there are stories of specific people behind all those figures. I would like to ask the members of the families if they are ready to share the stories they brought with them. Let's start with Miss Oleksandra, if I may. Good afternoon. I would like to start that we are members of the family of a National Guard serviceman. My husband was protecting the city until the very last moment, and he walked out of Azovstal industrial facility. Now he ended up in Gorlivka. We were able to flee the occupied Mariupol to Vinnytsia region, but the grandmother was left in Mariupol, and she was calling every evening to my daughter, crying on the phone, asking her to come and see her. And my daughter decided to come visit her grandmother and look for her lost cats and to pick some things from Mariupol. I was trying to convince her not to go, but she did not listen to me. Everything was alright. She was helping her grandmother. She was gathering the things. And we were talking through video connection every once in a while, every evening. But then the connection was lost, and there was a video with her interrogation posted where she, in Riya Novosti, where she was saying that she was about to commit a terroristic act. Then there was a month of silence. We were looking everywhere, but there was no response. She's not here. Only after 2 months we got a response from the Donetsk Prosecutor's office that Iryna Navalna is in the Donetsk confinement cell. The lawyer got in touch with the grandmother, who took her money and disappeared. Only after a year the grandmother was able to see her granddaughter. She said there were representatives of the Russian mass media coming, and she told that she was beaten on her head severely. Then there was a sequence of violations of her rights, human rights and humanitarian rights. I had no opportunity to see Iryna In no way. Our people over there have no right to protection and defense at all. Since the beginning of our tragedy, I'm being accompanied by all of our structures like the Security Service of Ukraine, the Center for Human Rights, the Department of the Commissioner for Human Rights. We applied to the President himself and the Office of the President. We also addressed the United Nations and the Red Cross back in November, but there is no feedback other than the registration number. I don't personally understand the role of the Red Cross as to the use of its capability. They have not visited the confinement cell no single time, and I'm badly impressed by the formalism of their operation. They say they have no official confirmation about my presence of my daughter in the confinement cell in Donetsk. I had this confirmation from the occupational government of Donetsk region of DPR, but the Red Cross say it's no confirmation. I wonder how they can ignore their own statute. Now we've reached out to the government authorities of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. I'm surprised, but they still accept my addresses, but until this very moment I have not received any feedback from Moskalkova, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Russian Federation. I was meeting Dmitro Lubinets, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the President of Ukraine, and I asked him to remind Ms. Moskalkova about my address, and I am attempting to get any feedback from her so far. Well, with the view of the terrible situation with my family, I think that our government should be using the potential of international institutions. I'm hearing now addresses to the committees for the rights of the women, both European and on the United Nations level. I can tell you personally that those who came back from captivity told me about the tortures of my daughter, and after all the tortures, when my daughter came back to the cell, those who were brought back from captivity, they told that she was all a bruise. Well, I want to draw your attention to the fact that the Geneva Conventions contemplate the possibility of creation of the Institute of Patronage, patron countries, and I think that apart from Turkey and Switzerland, there are more countries that can support us in protection and defense of our captured citizens. I want to address Mr. Zelensky and Commissioner for Human Rights Mr. Lubinets to Main Directorate of Intelligence of Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, to international organizations. Please use all your potential and capabilities to free my family and all other Ukrainian citizens held in captivity. Thank you. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Thank you, Miss Oleksandra. Is anyone else ready to share their stories? Good afternoon. My name is Hanna. On the 9th of January 2023, in the occupied city of Melitopol, my friend Marharyta Kharenko was abducted by the Russians. Before that, the Russians made a search in her house, and on the next day they got back without Marharyta to take her tablet and her phone from her parents. That's it. About what we know about Marharyta. The only thing I know that they were going to the commander's office on a daily basis, where they did not get any information about any accusations with regard to their daughter and about her whereabouts. They are still intimidated, and they still are afraid to do any harm to her daughter. The news about abduction of Marharyta shocked a lot of denizens of Melitopol who knew her as a pharmacist who was working in the center of the city and adherent of the Baptist Church in Melitopol. I've never heard anything from her about any guerrilla activities, so the potential reasons for detention were unclear to me. Honestly, the mentality of Ukrainian doesn't fit a notion that a person can be abducted for just their civil position. Having analyzed the actions and the behavior of the occupiers, I've segregated certain reasons why she could be abducted. Marharyta was posting on her mass media in Ukrainian. Also, she posted in Instagram about the death of her friend from the armed forces of Ukraine. Yet another reason could be the attendance of the Melitopol Baptist Church. Somehow the Baptist Church have become targets of the occupiers since the very first days of the occupation. The priests were held captive in basements. Maybe they were looking for some American trace there. I can only make hypotheses about what is inside their heads. Marharyta was working in Zaporizhia and Melitopol social delivery service. There was a logo of USAID posted on her social media, which may have become another reason for abduction. I understand that I'm sitting here and my friend, meanwhile, is staying there, maybe being even tortured. So I started calling to different organizations, trying to report about my abducted friends. So I was able to submit the reports to National Police of Ukraine, and the case is now being investigated by the Prosecutor's Office of Zaporizhia region. I also addressed the International Committee of Red Cross in Geneva, the Commissioner for Human Rights, Dmytro Lubinets, and other organizations. Another important part of my way was spreading information, raising awareness about Marharyta and social networks. And every person I communicate with, everybody I meet, I told them about Marharyta and her situation. Thus, after a while, I've met the representatives of the European Council, whom I shared the information about Marharyta with. I've also found a priest of the church attended by Marharyta, and thanks to the sharing of my posts, I found a person in Russian Federation who was somehow connected to the people, to the occupiers in Melitopol, which let me know that Marharyta was alive. I found out about her whereabouts and what she was accused of, plus the approximate dates of the court processes to be held over Marharyta. I conveyed all the information to the Security Service of Ukraine. She was accused of terrorism and extremism, but the case only contained the protocols of her interrogations. She refused to provide any evidences. This is why the Russian military came to her parents, pressing on her and trying to force Marharyta to provide any evidences of her terroristic activities, or at least something they could accuse her of. There was a court process over Marharyta in March this year. She was accused of calling fire for the armed forces of Ukraine. There was a number of versions, none of which could be verified, and for what I know, now her case is outside the military jurisdiction. It's transferred to the civil jurisdiction, but unfortunately she was not freed. She's still held captive, and the new reasons for accusations are being searched for. Friends friends of Marharyta were receiving messages from her phone with offers to meet and to have a conversation. After the first court process, the parents of Marharyta were allowed to visit her, to bring her clothing and food. In cooperation with the priest of the church Marharyta was attending, we were able to submit the application to the Senate of the United States, and the priest also is in constant communication with Ivan Fedorev, the mayor of the city of Melitopol. I would like to extend my appreciation for the change of status of Marharyta. Her status was changed from abducted to held captive on the 1st of May. All the responsible organizations and authorities in Ukraine are involved in this work, and I think that only the pressure of international organizations over Russia will help us to bring all of our family members back home, all of our friends back home. Meanwhile, we're at home and the international organizations are mired in bureaucracy. Ukrainians are being abducted, tortured, and unfortunately killed. Thank you. Hanna, thank you for sharing your story. Anhelina, please, the floor is yours. On the 17th of June 2022, the husband of my wife was abducted. In the evening of the very same day, we were visited by the Russian military. Our house was searched. Yaroslav's belongings were taken away. And in the presence of a kid, they made a few shots in the air, saying that it was accidentally. Then within the following 3 weeks, we had no information about whereabouts of Yaroslav. His parents were visiting the occupational government offices, but they were told Yaroslav is not in the city. In a couple of days, we were visited by the military again. They took Yaroslav's belongings, they took pictures of her wife's passports, and in response to the question why did they do so, they said that she's a potentially dangerous person. In a little while, Yaroslav was brought back to his parents' house for a brief visit. He was able to have some meals there, to take a shower, and then he was transported to the Crimean confinement cell in Simferopol. A connection with him was lost for a while, but then he was provided with a lawyer who was certain Yaroslav was guilty and he should recognize his guilt. He is accused of terrorism, as if he wanted to detonate the collaborationist car in Melitopol. And then there was a video where he recognizes the guilt, but he didn't look natural in that video. And then his case was given to a lawyer who takes care of this, who deals with the similar cases of the abducted Ukrainians, who can convey letters to his wife and back to Yaroslav. He says that he is being tortured, he is being beaten. In the prison itself, the conditions of confinement are very bad. He sleeps on the floor, he has no bunk, no mattress, nothing like that. The confinement cell servicemen come to beat him, but he cannot recognize them because they don't allow him to look them in the face. There was a court proceedings held in Rostov on the 19th of June, and there is no further information about him, and the investigation will be going on. As soon as anybody who can provide any information about him will be showing up. Anhelina, thank you very much for this information. Oleksandr, Hanna, and Anhelina, I wish your friends and members of your families come back as soon as possible, and the criminals are punished according to all the standards of international law, because the figures that were shown by different organizations, they should have human faces, because there are people, there are families behind each and every such figure, and it's all about us, about Ukrainians who unfortunately are hardened in conditions like that. We've heard that now the family members of those abducted do an incredible work to find some small pieces of information about their close ones. So I would like to ask Oleksandr Ziuz, as the representative of the Office of the Prosecutor General, what the office does to investigate those crimes and to find those people who are being held captive by Russian Federation. Thank you very much for this opportunity of being present during this presentation. Now there is a pre-court investigation in 3,305 cases of the violent abduction, and the investigation identified more than 17,000 people who are illegally held captive by Russian Federation. 1,655 persons are recognized as victims in such investigations. The note of service is served to 99 persons, and the cases are brought to the court in 66 such cases. By this category, I would like also to stress that these details cannot reflect the actual number of the civil population who were violently abducted, because now there is no opportunity to conduct investigations in temporarily occupied territories. I would like to say that during investigation in the occupied territories, we identified 55 places of illegal detention of the civilians and military. Now we know about 60 places of such illegal detentions, which could be called torture chambers, because that's a systemic kind of thing. And during the occupation, we see that there were such torture chambers in Kherson, Kharkiv, Kyiv, Zaporizhia regions, everywhere. This practice is still widespread in the territories occupied since 2014. All those torture chambers together are unified in one criminal proceeding. The regional investigation authorities, they investigate some cases separately in specific cases. One of the torture chambers was visited by the representatives of Russian FSB who manage this system, because such actions are repeated as if according to the stencil in all those regions. This is a part of the screening system that they make all the Ukrainian patriots go through. We know it from the presentation of the main provisions of this report. In Kherson alone, there were 11 torture chambers found, and according to the information from the Prosecutor's Office of the International Criminal Court, all those cases are investigated and the evidences are being still gathered. So our task for the time being is not to lose any single evidence, to document all the evidences, to gather all information possible, because the justice and bringing them to liability will take some time, and for the time being we cannot tell you for sure how much it's about to take. But I want to convince you, that I want to reassure you that everybody guilty of those crimes will be brought to liability. And the question will be to Oleksandr Kononenko: how do you manage to find the information about the abducted people, and do you make it bringing them back home to Ukraine? Good afternoon. Well, first of all, I would like to greet everybody with the Constitution Day, and I want to remind you that the Constitution guarantees the rights of the people to their rights and freedoms. And obviously we want to thank our armed forces for this opportunity to talk about the civilians on this day, because the armed forces ensure the security of the civilians, and they let us discuss this problem. There is an active discussion in the society about the civil hostages, and this problem is probably even more important than the problem of the military prisoners of war, because they are abducted in non-organized way, and their people are left alone on their own with their problems. Even now, when our military had to withdraw from some territories, the civilians were the ones to express their pro-Ukrainian position. They were reminding about the Ukrainian state, and this is exactly what they were detained for. This is exactly what they ended up in those torture chambers for. And I think that it's unfair that they bear this responsibility now. So I think that the government should pay more attention to this problem, and just like the relatives of the abductees emphasized that the civilian hostages should be the first ones to be brought back, I would also like to mention that from the 2nd of May, the register of the abductees started operating in Ukraine. It's very important for understanding of the number of the Ukrainians who are considered missing in action, and it's more than 100,000 persons for the time being. About 10 to 11,000 Ukrainians reported to the Office of the Prosecutors General and the Office of the Commissioner for the Human Rights about their abducted or missing relatives or friends. But we don't understand for the time being what was going on in Mariupol or Volnovakha. We don't know what's going on in Berdyansk or Melitopol now, and only after those territories are freed, unfortunately, we will again find out about the torture chambers, and this is when we will be understand what are the numbers of affected persons. For the time being, we were able to set up coordination with the Dmitry Lubinets vis-a-vis Tatiana Moskalkova, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the President of Russian Federation. This is the only official channel of communication with the Russian party, and it's aimed at solution of the humanitarian problems. As to the efficiency of this channel, I would like it to operate way better, but we hope that those measures that or actions that the Russians try to take in their country will result in some movements with regard to the civil individuals. I don't want to advertise their actions, what they report and what they try to state, but I just want our Ukrainian citizens to be brought back to Ukraine. The only figure I would like to name is 1,900 persons, the citizens of Ukraine, list of which was conveyed to Moskalkova. And all of those people were abducted in Ukraine, and they are all above 70 years. Only those missing in action above 70 years amount to more than 1,900 persons. We got no response to that list. Well, as to the section, say 16 to 25 years, I want to say that 25 years, you know, some of those who were 25 back in 2014, they are held in captivity since 16 or 17. They are little kids. like those ones who perished in Berdansk. So it's 991 person of that age. So there is an extensive number of such Ukrainian citizens who are considered missing in action. I hope that shortly we address to international organizations. First of all, the Commissioner for Human Rights communicates with their colleagues, and this problem is being emphasized again and again. The civil hostages in accordance with the 4th Geneva Convention, with no additional requirements, should be let go, should be freed. The only thing admitted by the Geneva Convention that the civil hostages can be internated but the opposing parties should provide free access to such civil hostages, to provide them with lawyers, but none of these requirements is complied with. In fact, the Russians try to turn all of our civilians into criminals. Those accusations are quite absurd, starting with terrorism, extremism, and that there is an article in the criminal court, resistance to the special military operation. But the Russian criminal code does not contemplate any punishment for this violation. For example, when they say that the collaboration is provide support to the armed forces of Russian Federation, but the Ukrainians are being accused of affiliation with the armed forces of Ukraine. So there is a hybrid approach even in the criminal code of Russian Federation. Everything is turned upside down, and it's difficult for normal human understanding. So all of our people who were detained, they were detained for expressing pro-Ukrainian position at least once, in one way or another, either in their social media or just by speaking Ukrainian language. Thank you very much, Mr. Oleksandr. We understand that Russians in no way adhere to the rules stipulated by the world. They play their terrible games. Miss Maryia, are you online? Are you with us? Miss Maryia is supposed to be with us online. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Miss Maryia. After everything we've heard today, those terrible figures, those terrible stories that we've heard from the first hand, so to say, from the close ones, what should be the actions of Ukraine and the global community to bring back our citizens home and to bring the guilty ones to liability? Well, the first thing I would like to start with, that the prospects of the civil investigation and the investigation within the Ukrainian criminal legislation, it's important not to investigate the separate crimes alone, but to identify the structural elements, because the violent abduction is not only a war crime but a crime against humanity. It means that it's an organized plan to attack the civilian population. According to the practice of international tribunals, those crimes, they have certain patterns. From what we see in Ukraine is the targeting of specific groups of Ukrainian population, which one way or another express non-loyalty to Russian Federation, to Russian ideological narratives, or those who were perceived as the persons doing so. The following thing, we see that the armed aggression is going on for more than a year, and in all the occupied territories there are cases of abduction going on and on, happening again and again. Many representatives of the Russian armed forces are involved in this process. We know that there are special blocks being created in Russian enforcement service so that people who are abducted are hidden from the representatives of the Red Cross and representatives of other international organizations. So we have to identify those structural elements. We see there are public addresses in the mass media, on the internet, that's a planned action, that's a systemic policy, but when we come to the point of the tribunal, we will have to provide some clear evidences that could not be disputed, because those messages online could not be enough. So my address to the civil organizations and international organizations dealing with those terrible stories, please try to look at the bigger picture, to scale it up so that we work with those crimes as the crimes against humanity. Thank you very much, Miss Maryia. We still have time for one short question and a brief answer. Do we have any questions from the floor? Well, if I may, could you please tell us, do you have any details about the number of activists detained in Crimea? Have you investigated this issue? If I may answer, this specific report was dedicated to the period of the full-scale invasion in the territories that were occupied by Russia temporarily, starting from the 24th of February 2022. So we've made a brief review of what was going on in Crimea since 2014. We know about Reshat Ametov, the first victim, the first abductee, but in this report we did not cover them. In the same way, we did not analyze the places of detention, because a partner organization from Ukraine 5 AM coalition, who documents the war crimes, and the Media Initiative for Human Rights, they represented a very interesting review recently about the places of detention, but that information was not covered in our report. Thank you. I want to thank all the panelists. I wish both your family members and friends and everyone else who is being held captive by Russian Federation comes back home as soon as possible, and Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform gets back in operation within 10 minutes, and we will talk with the chairman of Ukrenergo about preparation to the winter and condition of our power grids. Thank you for staying with us.